It's 1950. You're Frank McNamara, one of New York City's most successful businessmen. You've just finished a dinner meeting at a Manhattan restaurant, surrounded by clients, impressing everyone at the table. The waiter brings the check. You reach into your jacket pocket. Nothing. You left your wallet at home. The embarrassment is total. But somewhere between that moment of humiliation and the second glass of wine someone else paid for, an idea was born that would change the way the entire world spends money. Frank McNamara went back to that same restaurant exactly 1 year later. He paid the bill with a small cardboard card. He called it the Diners Club. And with that single transaction, he accidentally lit a fuse that a 100-year-old delivery company had no idea was burning. This is the story of how American Express responded, how they built the most desirable piece of paper on the planet in under 90 days, and why the color purple changed everything. To understand why 1958 mattered so much, you have to understand what American Express actually was before the card existed. Founded in 1850 as a freight and delivery company, American Express had spent a century building one thing above everything else: a name people trusted. They moved packages, money, and eventually people across a continent. By the early 1900s, they had invented the traveler's check, a document you could use instead of cash anywhere in the world. It was their crown jewel: simple, reliable, and for decades, completely dominant. Then a man forgot his wallet at dinner, and the crown started to slip. The Diners Club card was not impressive to look at. It was a small rectangle of stiff beige cardboard with a list of restaurants printed on the back. There was nothing luxurious about it, nothing aspirational. It looked exactly like what it was: a practical solution to a practical problem. But the idea behind it was explosive. For the first time in history, you could walk into a restaurant, eat, drink, and leave without exchanging a single dollar. The card was your promise. The bill would come later. McNamara had essentially separated the act of consuming from the act of paying. And once people experienced that feeling, they never wanted to go back. By 1951, Diners Club had 42,000 members. By 1955, that number had climbed past 200,000. Hotels started accepting it. Airlines followed. The card was no longer just for dinners. It was becoming a new kind of money. American Express watched all of this and kept moving slowly. The traveler's check was still growing. The business was still profitable. There was no burning reason to rush into a market they didn't fully understand yet. That caution, reasonable as it seemed at the time, was costing them every single month. By 1957, the cost became impossible to ignore. Diners Club was processing millions of transactions per year. Bank of America had just announced their own card program. A second company called Carte Blanche had entered the market specifically targeting wealthy travelers, which was exactly the customer American Express considered their own. The boardroom conversation shifted quickly from caution to urgency. The problem was not just competition. The deeper problem was positioning. American Express had built its entire brand on being the most trusted name in financial services. If they entered the card market late and launched something ordinary, something that looked and felt like every other card on the market, they wouldn't just lose the battle. They would damage the one thing they had spent a century constructing. They couldn't just launch a card. They had to launch the card. In the summer of 1958, American Express committed to a timeline that, by almost any business standard, was completely insane. They would design, produce, and launch a charge card in under 90 days. The pressure inside the New York offices during those months was unlike anything the company had experienced. Executives who had spent careers building careful, methodical systems were now being asked to move at a speed that felt reckless. Designers, printers, and product managers worked in parallel, often without complete information, making decisions in hours that would normally take months. The first and most important decision was this: the card could not look like the Diners Club card. That beige cardboard rectangle represented a world of practicality, of problem solving, of middle management expensing a business lunch. American Express wanted something different. They wanted a card that felt like it belonged in the pocket of someone who had already made it. Someone who didn't need credit because they had money. Someone for whom the card itself was a statement. They needed it to feel like royalty. The color purple was not an accident. For most of human history, purple dye was one of the rarest and most expensive substances on Earth. Roman emperors wore it. Byzantine rulers used it to mark official documents. In Japan, only the highest members of the imperial court were permitted to wear it. The color had spent thousands of years accumulating a single association: power. By the 1950s, synthetic dyes had made purple accessible to anyone. But the cultural weight remained. American Express also had a practical reason for the choice. Purple was already the color they used on their most secure financial documents, including the traveler's check. It carried an internal language that said, "This is official. This is valuable. This is ours." When the design team placed the first printed card on the table, something clicked. It didn't look like a card. It looked like a credential. Something you would hesitate before handing to a waiter. Not because you were unsure it would work, but because you wanted him to see it for just one extra second. On October 1st, 1958, the American Express card launched to the public. The company had projected modest numbers. A few thousand applicants in the first weeks, enough to build a base, test the systems, and refine the product before scaling. What actually happened was something nobody inside that building had prepared for. 250,000 people applied immediately. Not over a year, not over a quarter, immediately. The response overwhelmed the processing systems. Letters piled up faster than they could be opened. Merchants who had been reluctant to add another card network to their operations were suddenly calling American Express asking how to sign up. The card had not entered the market. It had landed on top of it. Diners Club had 8 years, a head start, and hundreds of thousands of existing members. None of it mattered. The moment the purple card appeared, it became the one people wanted. Not because it did more, because it meant more. By 1959, just 1 year after launch, American Express converted the card from cardboard to plastic. The purple remained. The decision was practical. Cardboard absorbed moisture, bent at the corners, and wore out inside a wallet within months. Plastic solved all of that. But the team was careful not to change anything that wasn't broken. The dimensions stayed the same. The color stayed the same. The words "member since" appeared for the first time on the face of the card. A detail so small it could be missed entirely. It wasn't missed. Members noticed it immediately and understood exactly what it meant. You were not a customer. You were not an account number. You were part of something that had a history, and your start date was printed right there as proof. Throughout the early 1960s, the network expanded fast. By 1963, American Express had cardholders in 130 countries. The purple card had followed the same routes that the traveler's check had opened decades earlier, but it moved faster and reached deeper. You didn't need to plan ahead or visit a bank before your trip. You just brought the card and it worked. In 1966, American Express introduced the gold card. It was the first time they had deliberately used the card itself as a tiering mechanism, a way of telling the world not just that you were a member, but what kind of member you were. The purple card had created the floor. The gold card created the ceiling. And once you build a ceiling, the only logical next question is what comes after it. But before that question could be answered, something quieter happened. Something that most cardholders barely noticed and historians rarely mention. American Express killed the purple. In 1969, the standard card was redesigned. The deep violet that had defined the product from the very beginning was replaced with green. The official reasoning pointed to production consistency and global printing standardization. The practical reality was that green photographed better, reproduced more reliably across different printing facilities in different countries, and held its color longer inside a wallet exposed to daily friction and light. It was a logical decision. It was also the end of something. The green card that replaced it went on to become one of the most recognized objects in the world. Decades of advertising, cultural presence, and sheer volume of cardholders turned that particular shade of green into a symbol as loaded as any logo. But the people who had carried the purple version knew something the green card could never quite claim. They had been there at the beginning, when the whole thing was still an emergency, when the color was chosen not by a committee with 6 months of consumer research, but by a room full of people who had 90 days to change history, and somehow did.